She had spent years loving him, believing in their future. But when he kissed her in front of Rachel, expecting her to break down, Rachel did the unthinkable. She smiled and handed him the divorce papers. In that moment, everything changed. What followed was the journey of a woman who would no longer cry, but stand tall and claim her own happiness. Rachel Walker had always believed in love. She had always believed that it could withstand anything, that when you loved someone deeply enough, it would always be worth fighting for. She had given everything to her marriage with Ryan. Every ounce of her heart, every piece of her soul, she had poured into the life they had built together. But now, standing in the grand living room of their shared home, Rachel realized that the man she had built her life around, the man she had once thought would be her forever, was no longer the man she thought he was. Ryan was standing in front of her, his lips pressed against the woman she had once called a friend. He kissed her in a way that Rachel couldn't ignore, a way that said, "This is who I want now." He had no shame, no guilt. He kissed her in front of Rachel, with an air of superiority, as if he expected her to crumble, as if he expected her to fall to pieces. But Rachel didn't crumble. She didn't cry. Instead, she did the unthinkable. She smiled and handed him the divorce papers. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of the moment settling over her like a heavy, suffocating fog. Her husband, Ryan, was standing in front of her with his lips pressed against another woman's. A woman who had once been her friend. A woman she had trusted. The scene before her was something out of a nightmare she had never imagined would come true. And yet, here it was unfolding in real time. Ryan pulled away from the kiss, his eyes meeting Rachel's for the first time since he had stepped into the room. His expression was one of calm confidence, as if he had already made peace with what he had just done. His gaze shifted, just briefly, to the woman standing beside him, a woman whose name had once been spoken with affection, a name Rachel had once thought of as a sister. "Rachel," Ryan said, his voice unshaken. "I think it's time we talk." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the rage bubbling up, the tears threatening to spill, but she held it together. She couldn't let him see her fall apart. She had spent years begging herself not to let the cracks show, but now, standing here, with the truth staring her in the face, she knew that something inside her had finally snapped. "I'm not going to cry," Rachel whispered to herself, as if trying to remind her heart that it didn't have to break in front of them. It didn't have to break for him. Ryan glanced at the woman beside him, who gave Rachel a look of mock sympathy, as if they both knew exactly how she would react. Rachel clenched her fists, feeling the anger pulse through her veins. She wouldn't let them win. Not like this. "Is this how it's going to be?" Rachel's voice was steady, even as she felt the weight of the situation threaten to crush her. She couldn't keep the bitterness from creeping in, but she held it back, forcing herself to sound calm. Ryan didn't answer at first. He just stood there, staring at her as if he were waiting for some sort of emotional breakdown, something he could use to further justify the decision he had already made in his mind. Rachel could see it in his eyes. He had already written her off.
To him, this was the end.
To him, it was over. And for a moment, Rachel thought about the years they had spent together. The laughter, the quiet mornings, the way his smile had once made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. But that was before. That was when things were real. Before he had become someone she didn't recognize. Before he had decided that she wasn't enough. "I never thought it would come to this," Ryan said finally, his voice tinged with what sounded like regret, but it was too little, too late. "I never wanted to hurt you, Rachel." Rachel felt a sharp pain in her chest. It was the same pain she had felt years ago when they had first started to drift apart, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the pain of someone who was trying to save their marriage. It was the pain of someone who had finally accepted that there was nothing left to save. Rachel took a step forward, but instead of crumbling into tears, she straightened her back, lifting her chin with a new sense of clarity. "You should have thought about that before you kissed her." Ryan's face faltered for a moment, the mask slipping just briefly, before he regained his composure. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Rachel was already done. She had spent too long waiting for him to change, to realize what he was throwing away. She had given him everything, her love, her trust, her faith in their future, but in the end, it wasn't enough. The woman beside him gave Rachel an apologetic glance, but there was no sincerity in it. Rachel could see the smug satisfaction in her eyes. The same satisfaction she had worn on her face every time she'd smiled at Rachel over the years, knowing that she was secretly winning. That she had already taken what Rachel had fought so hard to keep. But not anymore. Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope that had been sitting there for days. She had prepared for this moment, not knowing when it would come, but knowing it would. Inside was the divorce paperwork. The papers that would end this chapter of her life once and for all. Without saying a word, Rachel walked toward Ryan, holding out the envelope. Her hand trembled slightly, but her gaze never wavered. Ryan stared at her, confusion crossing his features as he looked down at the envelope. "What's this?" he asked, his voice tinged with something resembling disbelief. "Divorce papers," Rachel said softly, but the words hit him like a punch to the gut.
He shook his head.
"You can't be serious. Rachel, we can work through this. We can fix this." Rachel met his eyes, her heart steady but her voice firm.
"No, Ryan.
This is the end." For a long moment, Ryan didn't move.
He didn't speak.
He just stared at her, as if he couldn't quite comprehend what had just happened. His world, which had once seemed so secure in his mind, was slipping away. He had thought that Rachel would beg for him to stay, that she would crumble and fall into his arms, pleading for their marriage to be saved. But Rachel wasn't that woman anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. Finally, with a sigh, Ryan reached for the papers, his fingers brushing against them as if they were foreign. But even as he took them from her hand, he didn't look at her with the same affection or care he had once shown. His gaze was hollow, empty. "Are you really going to let it end like this?" Ryan's voice was quieter now, tinged with desperation. Rachel took a step back, her chest tight with emotion she hadn't expected.
"No, Ryan."
"You let it end like this. You made your choice." The room fell silent once more. The weight of his actions had finally caught up with him, but it was too late. Rachel had made her choice too. And that choice was freedom. As Rachel turned to leave, her hand gripping the door handle, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. This wasn't the woman who had once begged and pleaded for Nathan's attention. This wasn't the woman who had been lost in the shadow of someone else's decisions. This was a woman who had learned the value of her own worth. And she would never let someone else define her again. The weeks following that night passed in a blur of paperwork, final decisions, and the quiet echoes of a life Rachel had once known. Nathan had made his move. He had kissed her in front of Rachel, expecting her to fall apart, expecting her to beg him to stay. But Rachel had stood her ground, and in doing so, she had taken the first step in reclaiming her life. The life she had thought was lost forever. But the price of freedom, she had come to realize, was more than just the paperwork that had been signed. It was the quiet mornings without him, the evenings when the bed felt too big, too empty, the laughter that had once filled their home now gone. Rachel didn't regret her decision, not for a second. But she had underestimated the silence. She had underestimated how loud it could be. And she had underestimated how deep the loneliness would cut. 2 weeks after the divorce papers were signed, Rachel found herself standing in front of their old home, staring up at the large oak tree in the yard. It had always been her favorite part of their property. The tree had stood strong through every season, its branches sprawling outward, providing shelter and casting a beautiful shadow on the grass beneath it. The same way Rachel had once been there, providing shelter for Ryan, always strong and unwavering. Now, she felt like the tree, rooted in the soil of her past, but ready to grow, ready to embrace the unknown. The future was no longer something she was afraid of. It was something she could now see clearly, standing tall in her own truth. But as she stood there, she could feel the weight of it all. The life they had built, the dreams they had shared. Everything had been a lie. The pain of his betrayal was still fresh, but with every passing day, Rachel felt the sharp edges of the past dulling, smoothing out into something more manageable. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her from her thoughts. She pulled it out, and her heart skipped when she saw the name on the screen. It was from Emily, her daughter. "Mom, I need to talk. Are you home?" Rachel frowned, her heart fluttering with concern. Emily had always been her rock, but lately she had seemed distant, as if something had shifted in her that Rachel couldn't quite reach. She quickly typed out a reply. "I'm here. What's wrong?" A few moments later, Emily's reply came through. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, Emily arrived at Rachel's house, her face tight with worry. She was wearing a coat, her hair still wet from the rain. As soon as she stepped inside, Rachel could see that something was off. Emily's usual confidence was gone, replaced with a look of uncertainty Rachel hadn't seen in her daughter before. "Mom, we need to talk," Emily said softly, sitting down on the couch and looking up at Rachel. Rachel's heart clenched in her chest. She could sense the heaviness in her daughter's voice, the way her eyes kept darting away. Emily had always been open with her, always sharing the thoughts and feelings that troubled her. But tonight, there was something she was holding back. "Of course," Rachel said, sitting down next to her daughter. "What's going on, Em?" Emily hesitated, her fingers fiddling with the sleeves of her coat. Then, finally, she spoke. "I saw Ryan today," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Rachel froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had prepared herself for many things in this new life, things she could control. But seeing Nathan through Emily's eyes? That was something she wasn't ready for. "You did." Rachel managed, her voice tinged with surprise. "What did he say?" Emily shook her head, her brow furrowing as she glanced up at her mother. He apologized. A lot. He said he didn't want things to end the way they did. He said he misses you, that he's sorry." Rachel swallowed, the words slicing through her. She had expected that, expected Nathan to come crawling back with apologies. But hearing it from Emily made it feel real. It felt like betrayal all over again. "He misses me?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice even. "He misses me, after everything?" Emily nodded, her eyes looking away as if the truth was too painful to face.
"Yeah."
"But that's not why I'm here, Mom." Rachel's heart twisted, knowing what was coming. She braced herself for whatever Emily was about to say, but she wasn't prepared for the words that followed. "I'm not sure if I want him back," Emily whispered. "But a part of me still does. And I feel so guilty for it." Rachel's heart shattered, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. She had to be strong. She had to be the one to help Emily through this. Emily had already suffered enough because of Nathan. The last thing she needed was to feel torn between the two people she loved most in the world. "Sweetheart," Rachel began softly, "you're not wrong for feeling conflicted. You've known your father your entire life. And when he shows up with those words, asking for forgiveness, of course you're going to feel something. It's natural. But he hurt you," Emily said, her voice shaking. "He hurt you so much. How can I forgive him for that?" "Because you don't have to," Rachel replied, her voice firm yet gentle. "You don't have to forgive him if you don't want to. But you have to understand that his actions were never your fault, Emily. You've always been enough. Just like I was always enough." There was a long pause before Emily looked at her mother, the weight of her emotions finally breaking through. "But what if I'm just like him? What if I end up hurting the people I love, just like he did?" Rachel shook her head, her hand resting gently on Emily's. "You are nothing like him, Emily. You've already proven that. You're strong. You're capable of making your own choices. And you don't have to make them alone." That night, as Emily went home to think things over, Rachel found herself reflecting on the years she had spent in the shadow of her own self-doubt. The years she had let Nathan control her sense of worth. She had let him convince her that she wasn't enough, that she wasn't worthy of love, of respect. But that wasn't who she was anymore. The woman who sat in her living room now, the woman who had handed Nathan the divorce papers, was a woman who had learned to love herself, to trust herself. And no one, not even Nathan, could take that away from her. The following weeks were a strange mix of silence and resolution for Rachel. On one hand, there was the unrelenting peace that came from being alone, from knowing that she had made the right choice for herself. On the other hand, There was the absence of him, the echo of his presence in the house, in her mind, that lingered in corners of the rooms like a shadow that refused to leave. It was in the quiet moments when she would feel it most. The way his absence would fill the empty space around her. Not with pain, but with a kind of emptiness she wasn't sure how to navigate. It had been years since she had been just Rachel. Before marriage, before children, before the ties that bound her to another life, Rachel had been just herself, a woman with her own dreams, her own ambitions, her own future. And now, for the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel was beginning to understand what it meant to truly be free. It was a Sunday afternoon when the realization hit Rachel as she walked through the local farmer's market with Emily. The sun was high, casting a warm golden glow over everything. There were vendors with colorful flowers, homemade jams, and fresh produce. People were laughing, talking, walking their dogs, and Rachel found herself pausing, taking it all in. For the first time in years, she felt as though she had the space to breathe, without guilt, without the looming shadow of Nathan's decisions weighing her down. Emily was talking about work, her upcoming art exhibit, but Rachel's thoughts drifted as she walked beside her daughter. She looked at the faces around her, strangers, acquaintances, friends, and realized that in all of them, in all of these small moments, there was something she hadn't recognized before. Life was moving forward. Her life was moving forward. And for the first time, it wasn't tied to a man or a past filled with expectations. It was just her. "I never thought I'd get here, Rachel said quietly, turning to her daughter. "I never thought I'd feel this at peace. I didn't know it was possible after everything." Emily smiled softly, her expression filled with quiet pride. "You've always had it in you, Mom. You've just had to see it yourself." That evening, after they returned home from the market, Rachel spent some time in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner. As the smell of roasted vegetables and grilled chicken filled the air, she found herself reflecting again on how much had changed. The woman she was now, the woman who had walked away from a toxic marriage and refused to be defined by Nathan's actions, wasn't the same woman who had been waiting for him to change. This woman was strong. This woman was free. And for the first time in years, Rachel realized that she had everything she needed. She didn't need validation from anyone. Not from Nathan, not from anyone who had ever underestimated her. The doorbell rang that evening, pulling Rachel from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone, so when she opened the door, she was surprised to see her lawyer standing there, holding an envelope in his hand. "Mr. Howard," she said with a raised eyebrow, confused by his unexpected visit. "Rachel," he said with a serious look on his face. "I apologize for the intrusion, but this couldn't wait. I've been in touch with Nathan's lawyer regarding the final settlement. He's pushing for an appeal. He wants to reopen the case." Rachel's heart sank. She had known, deep down, that Nathan wasn't going to let things go. But she hadn't anticipated this so soon. "I don't understand," Rachel said, feeling the familiar tension return to her body. "Why is he doing this? The case was closed. The divorce papers are signed." "I'm afraid he doesn't see it that way. He's claiming there were discrepancies in the way the settlement was handled. That the terms were unfairly weighted in your favor," Mr. Howard explained. Rachel's stomach twisted in frustration. "And what am I supposed to do? Go back to court and relive all of this?" "I'll handle it, Rachel. You don't need to worry. But you'll need to be prepared. This isn't going to be easy." Rachel felt a wave of anger wash over her. She had already endured the pain of the divorce, the betrayal, the quiet years of rebuilding her life. Now Nathan wanted to drag her through it all again. But then, as she looked into her lawyer's eyes, something inside her shifted. She had already faced the worst of it. And if Nathan thought he could undo everything she had fought for, he was sorely mistaken. The next few days were filled with meetings, phone calls, and emails. It was like a nightmare she couldn't escape, the endless back and forth with Nathan's lawyers, trying to navigate the legal minefield he had created. But each time she felt overwhelmed, each time she thought she couldn't handle it, she reminded herself of the truth she had come to understand. She had fought for herself once, and she would do it again. By the time the court date arrived, Rachel had steeled herself. She had reviewed the documents, gone over her case with Mr. Howard, and knew that she wasn't going to let Nathan win this round. She wasn't going to let him rewrite the story of her life. Not again. The courtroom was full as she entered, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Nathan sat across from her, his face tense, his hand gripping the side of his chair as if it might give him some semblance of control over the situation. His eyes met hers briefly, but she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Rachel had already won. She knew it, and she could see the doubt creeping into Nathan's eyes as his lawyer started speaking. He wasn't the man who had walked out on her years ago. He wasn't the man who had kissed another woman in front of her. That man was gone. Nathan was just a man who had made a mistake that Rachel had long since forgiven. But forgiveness didn't mean she had to let him back into her life. It didn't mean she had to let him tear down the walls she had spent so long building. The case was over before Rachel had even realized it. Nathan's lawyer's arguments fell flat. The evidence was clear. The judge ruled in Rachel's favor, stating that there was no ground for reopening the case. As Rachel walked out of the courthouse, she felt the finality of the decision settle in. She had won. She had finally put an end to the chapters of her life that had been overshadowed by Nathan's absence. The man who had once held power over her was now nothing more than a ghost in her past. Later that evening, as Rachel sat in her living room, the warmth of her surroundings filling her with peace, she thought back to the moment when she had handed Nathan the divorce papers. That moment had been a turning point in her life. It had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. She had thought, at that moment, that she might cry, that she might feel some sort of regret, some longing for the life they had once shared. But all she felt was freedom. And tonight, as she looked out the window and watched the city lights twinkle in the distance, she knew that the woman she had become was the woman she had always been meant to be. The weeks after the court case were peaceful, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of something unspoken in the air. She had won. The judge had sided with her. Nathan's attempts to drag the past into the present had failed, but in truth, it wasn't just the legal victory that left her feeling unsettled. It was the realization that, despite everything, Nathan's shadow was still lingering in her life, even if she didn't want it to. The victory was more than just a piece of paper. It was the final confirmation that Rachel could move forward on her own, without being tethered to someone who had once promised to love her but had failed to do so. It wasn't about the house, the assets, or even the divorce settlement. It was about reclaiming the power she had given away, about standing on her own 2 feet again. On a warm spring morning, a few days after the ruling, Rachel stood in her kitchen, making a simple breakfast. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as she flipped the pancake batter. The kitchen, the home she had worked so hard to make hers, was quiet in a way that felt comforting. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing that, for the first time in years, she wasn't trying to fill a void. The doorbell rang and Rachel froze. She wasn't expecting anyone, but she walked to the door and opened it anyway. Standing in front of her was a woman she hadn't seen in years. "Rachel," the woman said with a nervous smile. "It's me, Claire." Rachel blinked, surprised. Claire was one of the few people from her past who had known both her and Nathan intimately. The two of them had shared countless dinners, laughter, and conversations about life. She had once thought Claire was someone she could trust. But when Nathan had left, Claire had disappeared, choosing to side with him. "Claire?" Rachel's voice was a mix of shock and caution. "What are you doing here?" "I'm sorry to just show up like this," Claire said, her voice tight with hesitation. I don't know where else to go." Rachel raised an eyebrow, stepping back to let Claire inside. "What's going on?" Claire seemed to shrink slightly as she entered, the weight of her own emotions too much to carry. She looked around Rachel's home, her eyes lingering on the pictures, the spaces that had once felt familiar, before turning to face her. "I don't know how to say this, Rachel. I've spent the last few years trying to make sense of everything, trying to ignore the truth. But I can't anymore. I was wrong. I should have been there for you." Rachel blinked, her heart squeezing in her chest. After all this time, Claire had come back, and now she was apologizing. Not for betraying her, Not for turning her back when Rachel needed her most, but for simply being silent. "What do you want, Claire?" Rachel's voice was steady, but there was a subtle tremor beneath it, something Claire could probably hear. "You chose him over me. I can't pretend that didn't happen." Claire looked at Rachel, her eyes filled with regret. "I thought I was doing what was best. I thought I had to choose between you and him. But I see now, after everything that's happened, I was wrong." Rachel took a deep breath, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You were wrong. You didn't choose me. You chose him. And look where that's gotten both of you." "I'm not here to make excuses," Claire said quickly. "But I'm sorry, Rachel. I should have been there for you when you needed me. And I wasn't. I wanted to tell you that I understand now. And if you'll let me, I want to be a part of your life again." Rachel stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of Claire's words pressing down on her. Part of her wanted to throw Claire out, to tell her she didn't need anyone who had abandoned her. But the other part, maybe the part she had buried for too long, wanted to believe that people could change. Maybe Claire wasn't the same person she had been all those years ago. But Rachel had learned something in the last year. Forgiveness didn't mean opening the door to hurt again. It didn't mean giving people a second chance to break her. And it certainly didn't mean she had to accept their apologies just because they felt guilty. "No," Rachel said softly, her voice firm. "I appreciate your apology, Claire. But I've moved on. You should, too." Claire's face fell, but Rachel didn't feel the need to explain further. The conversation was over. Rachel wasn't holding on to the past anymore, and she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Claire, drag her back into it. As the weeks went by, Rachel found herself reflecting on the strength it had taken to make that decision. Every time she made the choice to walk away from something that no longer served her, whether it was Nathan or Claire or any piece of her past, it felt like she was stepping into a new version of herself. A version of herself that was whole, independent, and strong. And, for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt truly free. Free from the ghosts of her marriage. Free from the expectations placed on her by the people who had once loved her, but had failed to protect her. One Saturday afternoon, Emily came over with her latest paintings, eager to show her mom the work she had done. Rachel couldn't help but smile as Emily set up the canvases on the dining room table. Her daughter had blossomed into a young woman who was finding her own voice in the world. "You're getting better every day," Rachel said, admiring the bright colors and bold strokes in Emily's latest pieces. "I'm learning from the best," Emily replied with a wink. "You're the one who taught me to stand up for myself." Rachel's smile softened, and she sat down beside her daughter. "You're stronger than I ever was at your age. And you've always known how to follow your heart." Emily paused for a moment, her face growing serious. "I know it's been hard for you, Mom, but I see now that you're not just surviving. You're thriving." Rachel's heart swelled with pride. "I'm not just surviving. I'm living." The more time Rachel spent with Emily, the more she realized that their bond was what mattered most. It wasn't just about surviving the wreckage of her marriage. It was about building a life that was meaningful, full of love, and completely her own. The loneliness still came in waves, but now, it didn't scare her. It was a reminder that the woman she was becoming was enough to fill the space she had created for herself, enough to stand on her own 2 feet and know that she was worthy of everything she had. And, as Rachel looked toward the future, she saw nothing but endless possibilities. She was no longer chained to the past, no longer holding on to something that had left her behind. She was free. She was strong. She was Rachel Walker. The days were becoming longer, the nights a little quieter. Rachel had found a rhythm in her life again, one that no longer revolved around anyone else's expectations or desires. Her gallery had flourished beyond what she could have hoped for, and her personal life, though quieter, had taken on a peaceful calm that she had never known in her years with Ryan. But as the months passed, there were moments when the quiet would become unbearable. There were nights when she would sit alone in her living room, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating the space, and think about what it had been like to have someone beside her. To have someone to share the ups and downs of life with. For all the anger she had felt toward Ryan, All the betrayal she had endured, there was still a part of her that missed the companionship they had once shared. But those moments of longing never lasted long. Each time, Rachel reminded herself of the woman she had become, the woman who no longer needed anyone to complete her. She had her work, her daughter, and the satisfaction of knowing she was no longer defined by someone else's decisions. One afternoon, as Rachel was finalizing plans for an upcoming exhibit, she received an unexpected call. It was from her lawyer, and her heart sank as soon as she saw his name flash on her screen. The last time she had heard from him, it had been regarding Nathan's desperate attempts to reopen their divorce settlement. Was he at it again? "Rachel, I need to talk to you about something important," her lawyer said, his tone more serious than usual. Rachel's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "It's about the trust funds. There's been some movement on Nathan's end. He's not letting this go, and now his lawyers are bringing up more claims. We're going to need to go back to court." Rachel closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. She had fought so hard to close this chapter of her life. She had won the case, walked away, and thought the storm was over. Now it seemed like Nathan was trying to drag her back into the same chaos. He couldn't let her be happy. He couldn't let her have her peace. But Rachel wasn't the same woman who had once stood at the mercy of his decisions. "I'll do whatever it takes to end this, once and for all," she said, her voice cold but steady. "This time, I'm not backing down." As the days passed and preparations for the legal battle began again, Rachel found herself reflecting on the journey she had been on. She had spent so long trying to prove herself, trying to gain the approval of others, especially Ryan. But now, everything was different. This fight wasn't for him. It was for her. She wasn't just fighting for the settlement or for a piece of property. She was fighting for herself, for the woman she had become. And no one, least of all Nathan, could take that away. It was a Wednesday morning when Emily came to visit, bringing with her a fresh perspective. Rachel had been working in the gallery all day, finalizing details for the exhibit, and her mind was tangled in the complexities of the legal case that had once again appeared on the horizon. Emily sat across from Rachel at the kitchen table, her expression thoughtful. "I know you're dealing with a lot right now, Mom," Emily said, her voice softer than usual. "But I just want you to know, you've already won." Rachel raised an eyebrow, surprised by her daughter's words. "What do you mean?" Emily leaned forward, her gaze steady. "You've already proven who you are. You don't need anyone's approval anymore. Not Nathan's, not anyone's. What you've done, the way you've rebuilt your life, it's all yours. No one can take that from you." Rachel felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest. She had always tried to be strong for Emily, always pushed forward despite the pain. But hearing these words, coming from the daughter who had watched it all unfold, made her realize just how far they had both come. "I don't know how to thank you, Rachel said quietly. "For everything." Emily smiled, a soft and knowing smile. "You don't have to thank me. You've taught me how to be strong, how to stand on my own 2 feet. You've shown me that no matter what happens, we always have each other." Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her daughter's words sink into her soul. They had both been through so much, yet here they were, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. That evening, as Rachel lay in bed, her mind buzzing with the upcoming legal proceedings, she thought about Emily's words again. She had won. No matter what happened in the courtroom, she had already claimed her victory. She had taken back her power. And that, she realized, was the true meaning of freedom. The court date arrived sooner than Rachel had anticipated. The air felt thick with anticipation as she stood outside the courtroom, waiting for the inevitable confrontation with Nathan and his legal team. She had prepared herself for this moment. She had prepared herself for everything Nathan could throw at her. But when the doors opened and she stepped inside, she wasn't the woman who had entered the same courtroom months ago. She wasn't the woman who had been filled with doubt, unsure of her own worth. She was Rachel Walker, strong, independent, and unapologetically herself. Nathan's eyes met hers across the room, and for the first time, she saw something in his gaze that wasn't the smug confidence he had once worn. There was a flicker of doubt, a flicker of fear. Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She wasn't afraid anymore. As the case unfolded, Rachel's legal team made quick work of Nathan's claims. It was clear that his attempts to reopen the case were weak, filled with false accusations and baseless claims. The judge quickly dismissed his arguments, and within hours, Rachel had won again. But this time it was different. This wasn't about the settlement. This wasn't about the money or the property. This was about Rachel's self-worth, about her reclaiming the life that Nathan had tried to take from her. Later that evening, as Rachel walked through the streets of the city, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The legal battles were behind her, and for the first time in years, she felt light. There was no more weight on her shoulders. There was nothing left to fight for except the life she had already built. As Rachel stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the skyline, she smiled softly to herself. The future was hers to create. It was hers to live. And she would do it on her own terms. The months following the court's ruling were filled with unexpected clarity. Rachel had always believed that freedom was something you earned, something that came with great sacrifice. But now, standing on the precipice of her new life, she realized that freedom wasn't something she had to work for, it was something she had already claimed. Each morning, she woke up without the heavy weight of Nathan's absence pulling at her chest. Each day, she stepped into her life with a sense of purpose, knowing that everything she had worked for was hers to keep. The gallery continued to flourish, and Emily, who had grown into an ambitious, self-assured young woman, was pursuing her dreams with the same passion Rachel had always hoped she would. Rachel's world was no longer defined by what she had lost, it was defined by what she had gained. The lessons she had learned from her marriage to Nathan had made her stronger, but they had also shown her that the most important person in her life was herself. She had survived a storm that would have shattered most people, and now she was standing tall in the sunlight. One evening, as Rachel walked through the city after a long day of meetings, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Normally, she wouldn't have answered, but something about it made her pause. She picked up the call. "Hello." "Rachel, it's Claire." Rachel froze. The voice on the other end was one she had not expected to hear again, not after everything that had transpired. Claire, her former friend, the one who had chosen Nathan's side over hers, was calling. "What is it, Claire?" Rachel's voice was calm, but there was a subtle edge to it. She had moved on from the hurt, but the memories of betrayal were still fresh, tucked away in corners of her heart. "I know you don't owe me anything, Rachel, but I wanted to reach out. I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything that happened, and I owe you an apology. I should have never turned my back on you. I can't change the past, but I can try to make things right." Rachel sighed, leaning against a nearby building as she listened. She had spent so many years holding on to the pain of her divorce, of losing her friend to betrayal. But now, in the light of everything she had accomplished, she realized something important. She didn't need Claire's apology to move forward. "Claire," Rachel began, her voice measured, "I appreciate you reaching out, but I don't need your apology. I've learned to forgive myself more than anyone else. You don't have to make amends for me to move on. I've already done that." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I understand. I didn't want to leave things unresolved. I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," Rachel said softly, "but it's done. I've moved on." Claire's voice trembled slightly. "I hope you know that I've always cared for you, Rachel, even if I didn't show it when I should have." Rachel closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I know. And maybe one day, we can find a way to move past this. But right now, I'm not the same person I was when we were friends. And neither are you." The conversation with Claire left Rachel thoughtful. It wasn't about forgiveness or reopening old wounds. It was about the closure she had already given herself. She didn't need to carry the weight of her past any longer. She had already built a life that was worth living, a life that didn't need anyone's validation. But as the days passed, Rachel began to realize that there was still one thing she hadn't fully confronted: the lingering effects of her marriage to Nathan. It wasn't that she still loved him, or even that she wanted him back. It was the fact that for so long, she had let him define her worth. She had let his actions dictate her sense of value. But now, for the first time, Rachel could see her worth clearly. She was not defined by Nathan's abandonment. She was defined by everything she had accomplished on her own. It was a Friday evening when Rachel was invited to an art auction hosted by a well-known philanthropist. She had been asked to showcase some of the pieces from her gallery, and the event was set to be a grand affair. Rachel had been looking forward to it for weeks, knowing that it would be another opportunity to expand her influence in the art world. As she prepared for the event, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She was no longer the woman who had waited in the shadows for Nathan to change. She had become a woman who commanded respect, who stood on her own, who had learned to love herself in ways she never thought possible. The night of the auction, Rachel arrived early, dressed in a sleek black gown that hugged her frame, her hair styled to perfection. The room was filled with guests, the air thick with conversation and the sound of clinking glasses. The gallery's artwork was prominently displayed, and Rachel couldn't help but smile as she watched people admire the pieces she had carefully curated. But then, as she walked across the room, she saw him. Nathan. He stood by the corner, his face set in a neutral expression, but Rachel could see the hesitation in his eyes. He had been invited to the event as well, no doubt to show his support for the art community. But his presence here, at this moment in her life, seemed almost surreal. He caught her gaze across the room, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. But Rachel didn't feel the old stirrings of pain or anger. She felt nothing. Nathan approached her, his expression guarded, but there was a flicker of regret in his eyes. "Rachel," he said softly, his voice hesitant. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Surprise," Rachel replied, her voice steady, calm. "I'm here for the same reason you are, because of the art." Nathan nodded, his eyes searching hers as if waiting for some sign that he had been forgiven. But Rachel wasn't here for forgiveness. She wasn't here to relive the past. She was here to live her future. "You look incredible, Rachel," Nathan said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I see what you've done with your life. I see what you've become." Rachel didn't flinch at his words. She didn't need to hear them anymore. She had already seen it. She had already become the woman she was always meant to be. "I've built something for myself, Nathan," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "I don't need you to see it. I don't need anyone to validate it. I know my worth." And with that, Rachel walked away, her heart light with the knowledge that she no longer needed anything from Nathan. She had everything she needed, everything she had fought for. The strength to move forward, the courage to live again. She was free. The days after the auction passed in a blur of new beginnings and renewed purpose. The weight of the past had finally lifted from Rachel's shoulders, and each day, she found herself embracing her newfound freedom with open arms. It was as if, by finally confronting her past, by standing tall in front of Nathan and letting him know that she had no more space for him in her life, she had cleared the way for the life she had always dreamed of. A life she could now truly call her own. Her gallery continued to grow, gaining more recognition in the art world with each passing month. New artists, new collections, and fresh faces kept the space alive, full of possibilities. Rachel had found her rhythm, and with it, her confidence. She was no longer playing the role of a supportive wife, constantly waiting for the approval of someone who had never truly seen her for who she was. Now, she was the artist of her own life, and she was painting her future with bold, unapologetic strokes. One morning, as Rachel sat at her desk, reviewing proposals for the next exhibit, she felt a shift in the air. She wasn't sure what had caused it. Maybe it was the fact that the sun was shining brighter than it had in days, or maybe it was the sense of calm that had finally settled in her soul. But for the first time in years, Rachel felt a deep sense of contentment, a knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her train of thought. She picked it up, seeing Emily's name flash across the screen. "Hey, Rachel said, her voice warm as she picked up the call. "Mom," Emily said, her voice crackling with excitement. "I've been thinking about something." Rachel smiled. "What's that?" "I'm thinking about taking a step forward with my art," Emily continued, her tone serious but filled with anticipation. I want to hold my own exhibit, my own gallery show. I've been working on my pieces, and I feel ready. Rachel's heart swelled with pride as she listened to her daughter. For years, Emily had watched her mother navigate the complexities of the art world, learning the ins and outs, the business side of it, and the importance of staying true to one's vision. And now, Emily was ready to step into her own spotlight. "You've always been ready, sweetheart," Rachel said softly. "You've got the talent, the heart, and the vision. If you feel like it's time, then I support you. I'll help however I can." "I want to do this on my own," Emily replied, her voice determined. "But I want you there with me, Mom. You've taught me everything I know. This is for you, too." Rachel felt a lump form in her throat. Her eyes misted over as she took in her daughter's words. This was a moment of pure joy, a moment when Rachel realized that she had not only survived her own trials, but had also built a legacy of strength, passion, and courage for Emily to follow. "You've already made me proud, Em," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. "And no matter what, I'll always be there for you." Over the next few weeks, Rachel poured herself into helping Emily prepare for her first solo exhibition. It wasn't just about the logistics or the details. It was about guiding Emily through her own journey, helping her navigate the insecurities that every artist faced, the fear of not being good enough, the doubt that crept in when no one was looking. But Rachel had been through it all before. She knew the way. As the date for the exhibit drew closer, Rachel watched her daughter with pride. Emily had always had an artist's soul, wild, free, and unapologetic. But now, she was stepping into the world, ready to show everyone who she was. And Rachel, for the first time in a long time, realized that she, too, was showing the world who she was. She wasn't just a woman who had survived betrayal. She wasn't just a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ashes of her past. She was an artist in her own right, someone who had carved her path, despite the obstacles, despite the people who tried to hold her back. The night of Emily's exhibit arrived, and the gallery was packed with people. The walls were adorned with Emily's vibrant, breathtaking artwork, pieces that told stories of resilience, of self-discovery, and of finding beauty in the most unexpected places. As guests marveled at the pieces, Rachel stood in the corner, her heart full of joy and pride. This was Emily's moment, and it was everything Rachel had hoped for. She looked at Emily, who stood near the center of the room, speaking with a group of potential buyers. Emily was confident, poised, and yet there was still a spark of nervousness in her eyes. Rachel could see it, the same spark she had once felt herself before her first big exhibit. But Emily wasn't hiding behind it. She was embracing it. And Rachel couldn't have been prouder. The night was a success, far more than Rachel had expected. Emily's artwork sold out almost immediately, and the buzz around her first solo exhibit was contagious. People were already asking about her next collection. Emily was officially on her way to becoming the artist she had always dreamed of being. As the last guests trickled out of the gallery, Rachel and Emily shared a quiet moment together, the two of them standing in the center of the empty room, surrounded by the artwork that had just launched Emily's career. "I'm so proud of you," Rachel said, her voice full of emotion. "You've done it. You've created something beautiful." Emily smiled, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." Rachel shook her head, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. "You had it in you all along. I just helped you find it." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, taking it all in. Rachel realized that this was what she had fought for. Not just for her own future, but for Emily's. To give her the space to grow, to learn, and to become the woman she was always meant to be. And as Rachel looked at her daughter, she felt the final piece of the puzzle fall into place. Emily was no longer the girl who had been hurt by the absence of her father. She was the woman who had claimed her own space in the world, just as Rachel had done. That night, as Rachel lay in bed, she reflected on the journey she had been on. She had once thought her life was defined by Nathan, by the failures of their marriage, by the pain of losing everything. But she had learned that her life was her own to create. She had chosen to rebuild herself. She had chosen to embrace her strength, her independence, and her worth. And now, As she looked toward the future, she realized that the possibilities were endless. She didn't need Nathan. She didn't need anyone to define her. She was Rachel Walker, an artist, a mother, and a woman who had finally found her way. And no one could take that away. The final chapter of Rachel's journey had begun long before she had picked up the phone to call her lawyer or sign the final divorce papers. It had started the moment she'd handed Ryan those papers, when she had chosen herself over everything she had once believed in. When she stopped waiting for him to choose her, and instead chose herself. The true turning point had come long after the paperwork had been signed, long after the settlement had been finalized. It had come in moments like this, standing in the gallery, looking at Emily's work, at the life her daughter was beginning to build for herself, at the quiet joy she found in the art of her own life. The future was here, and it was hers to claim. Rachel spent the next few months focusing on her work, on Emily, and on the life she had built around herself. The gallery was thriving. Her influence in the art world was growing. More than that, she had found a community of people who respected her not because of her past, not because of who she had once been in her marriage, but because of the woman she was now. And Rachel had come to realize something that had taken her years to fully understand. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She was thriving. And every new day that dawned felt like a gift she had given herself. She had created her own happiness, her own success, and no one could take that away. But even as Rachel basked in the glow of everything she had accomplished, there were still quiet moments when her thoughts drifted to Nathan. To the man who had left her when she was most vulnerable. The man who had, for a time, defined her life. And as much as she had learned to let go, she still found herself wondering what it would have been like if Nathan had stayed. What would their life have been? Would they have been happy? Would he have loved her the way she had loved him? But Rachel had stopped asking herself those questions. She had stopped trying to figure out what could have been. The only thing she knew for sure was that the life she had now was more fulfilling than anything she could have ever built with him. The life she had now was her own, crafted, shaped, and designed by her, not by anyone else's dreams or desires. She was no longer defined by the relationship that had once consumed her. She was her own person, and that person was enough. One afternoon, as Rachel prepared for another exhibit opening, she received an unexpected message. It was from Claire, her former friend, the one who had betrayed her all those years ago. The message was brief, but the weight of it was undeniable. Rachel, I know it's been a long time. I've been following everything you've done, and I'm proud of you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what I did. I hope you've found the peace you deserve. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected Claire to reach out. After everything that had happened, Rachel had closed that chapter of her life. She had forgiven her in her own way, but she never thought she would hear from her again. For a moment, Rachel stared at the message, her mind racing. She had spent so much time forgiving Nathan, forgiving the people who had wronged her. But forgiveness had always been about freeing herself, not them. It was about letting go of the weight that held her down. She didn't need Claire's apology. What Rachel needed was to keep moving forward. But she also knew that part of moving forward was acknowledging the past, letting go of the people who had held her back, and opening herself up to new possibilities. She took a deep breath and typed a response. Thank you for reaching out, Claire. I've moved on, but I appreciate your words. I've found peace, and I hope you have too. It was simple, but it was enough. Rachel didn't need to keep reliving the pain. She had already let go of the past. And now, with every passing day, she felt the strength of that decision more deeply. As the days passed, Rachel began to embrace the future in ways she had never allowed herself before. She thought about the future of her gallery, the future of her own artistic endeavors, and the future of her relationship with Emily. They were both learning what it meant to be free from the constraints of the past, free from the expectations of others, and free to be whoever they wanted to be. Emily, in particular, had begun exploring her own future with a newfound determination. Her art had taken on a life of its own. Emily had found her own voice, one that was entirely separate from Rachel's, one that was loud and unapologetic. It was exactly what Rachel had always hoped for her. And as Rachel watched her daughter flourish, she realized that her journey had come full circle. Emily was living proof that love and strength could coexist, that you could move past pain and still find beauty in life. Rachel didn't just want to help Emily succeed. She wanted to teach her the most important lesson of all, that she didn't need anyone to define her worth. Her worth came from within. One evening, after a successful exhibition at the gallery, Rachel stood outside, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and let the sense of accomplishment wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel proud of everything she had built, everything she had achieved. And as she stood there, in the quiet of the evening, she realized something else. She was finally at peace with the choices she had made. She had learned to love herself. She had learned to put her own happiness first. She had learned that the life she deserved was one she could create on her own. The road ahead was wide open. The future was hers.